Welcome to Balkans Debrief. I am Ilva Tare, a Nonresident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. The Western Balkans stand at a pivotal moment. After 3 years at the helm of the U.S. policy in the region, Deputy Assistant Secretary Gabriel Escobar is moving on to his next assignment. But before he departs, he's joined us for an exclusive Balkans Debrief interview. A tireless advocate of the Western Balkans Euro-Atlantic integration, thus Escobar has been a vocal supporter of the EU integration efforts. During his tenure, fostering dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, upholding Bosnia and Herzegovina's territorial integrity, and countering Russian influence were central to his mission. He has also emphasized the crucial role of tackling corruption and fostering economic growth. Yet challenges persist. And I'll ask by the first question asking you, thus, Escobar, as someone who knows the region very well, what can the Western Balkans do to overcome these hurdles and seize a European transformative, brighter future?
Well, look, I want to end up my tenure where I started it, with a message of optimism. So it is true that there's an awful lot of awful lot of challenges. There's an awful lot of corruption. There's political dysfunction. There is ethno-nationalism. All of the things that are still legacies of the 1990s. But what we have is we have a new generation of young people in the Balkans who are making things happen. And some of those are entering politics. And it's only a matter of time before we get a new generation of leaders who are focused on making progress in the 21st century, as opposed to relitigating the problems of the 1990s. And everywhere I go, I see that. And it doesn't matter what country I go to, I see a tremendous amount of promise. That is the partnership that we want. When I talk in my previous interviews, I've always said that our partnerships with the countries are with the people and not necessarily with the governments, and definitely not with individual parties. So I really do see great things happening in the Balkans in the future. And look, the biggest metric that we have is that when people from the Balkans move to Europe or they move to America, they do exceedingly well. The challenge is getting the structures to allow them to do well in their own countries. And with things that are happening now, like the Berlin process, the candidacy process, and now with the Western Balkans growth plan, I do hope that we can take advantage of that energy and that opportunity. So I am optimistic about what will happen in the Balkans in the near future.
It's easy to be an optimist when you don't work with the region anymore, isn't it?
No, I've always been an optimist about the region.
I know, it was just a joke to start our conversation. The U.S., as I said, has been among the most important actors for fostering stability, security, and prosperity in the Western Balkans. Considering the current situation that we talked about, that the region is at a critical point between its Euro-Atlantic processes and all disputes as nationalism heating up, analysts are advocating for a more thorough U.S. strategy in the Western Balkans, while that includes specific and actionable commitments. What are your thoughts on having a detailed plan laid out?
Well, look, we already have a detailed plan. And that plan is the accession process, the chapters, the metrics that are going to come with the Western Balkans growth plan, and those that are a part of the Berlin process. So countries do have homework to do. And look, when they become part of the European Union, they can look to a brighter future. If you look at the development of the new members of the European Union, the growth is stunning. The strength of the institutions is happening. And I'll give you one example. Yesterday, we hosted here a group of young journalists that were fellows for the Václav Havel program to develop independent journalism. And they were people from Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. And the idea that the Czech Republic would be a shining example of media freedom and democracy, where one generation ago it was enslaved in communism and had a government that actually imprisoned people for their views. So when we look at what the European Union has done over the last generation, every country that's joined the European Union is more democratic, more stable, more prosperous, and a net contributor to security and democracy in the world. I believe firmly that the countries of the Western Balkans can take their place as full and respected members of the European Union. So the metrics are already there. The requirements are already there. We are fully committed and fully partnered with our European colleagues on all of those processes. So we're going to continue to have an important role in that. And we are going to push as hard as we can, advocate as much as we can, and speak out as loud as we can that these countries must be full members of Europe.
And you have done that during your job too. You have supported the EU integration of the region for a Europe that is free and prosperous. But in the light of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine that has shaken the European security foundations and the broader geopolitical landscape, how can the US enhance its collaboration with the European Union to develop a unified approach regarding the future of the Western Balkans?
Well, look, I think we're constantly looking at ways how we can contribute to European processes and also how we can contribute ourselves bilaterally. And I'll tell you, we are strong advocates today. Yesterday and today, you see Jim O'Brien in Montenegro being a champion of the Western Balkans growth plan. But at the same time, being a champion of saying that the United States stands by the countries as they struggle to make the reforms that they need to improve the quality of their democracy, to strengthen their democratic institutions, and to create the kind of societies that people aspire to. Because remember, when people leave the Balkans, they don't go to Russia, they don't go to China, they go to Europe, or they go to the United States, but mostly Europe. So even though there are governments and there are certain pundits that say that that the dream of Europe is tarnished in the Western Balkans, it isn't. Now, the process itself has created frustration, and I think that's where the lack of credibility sometimes builds. But the ideals of Europe are still very much alive and still very much motivating the people of the region. We want to help with that.
Since we're talking about the people of the region, according to a recent IRI poll, Russia's war in Ukraine is completely unjustified for 5 of 6 Western Balkan countries. Serbia has 49% of respondents thinking that Russia is completely justified in Ukraine. How do you explain it, apart from the historical and cultural ties between the two countries? How do you see Russia's influence, not only in Serbia, but in the Western Balkans?
Well, look, I think, quite honestly, there is no way to look at the war in Ukraine and draw any other conclusion other than Ukraine is the victim of unprovoked aggression by an aggressive neighbor. It's fact. So the idea that people would come to a different conclusion, quite honestly, is based on the idea they're being given false facts. And it is true that there is a tremendous amount of Russian propaganda that operates in Serbia's media space. Now, we recently had our Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, Liz Allen, in Belgrade to talk specifically about this. Now, I think there are people, especially civil society inside of Belgrade, that will tell you the same thing. So that is part of it. There needs to be an improvement in the media space inside of Serbia, but I think that is the main way that these ideas, these erroneous ideas that Russia is the victim in this, are being propagated inside of Serbia.
How likely is increased tension in the region and risk for instability due to Russia's potential influence?
Well, look, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that the challenges that the Western Balkans face, Russia takes advantage of them. And it takes advantage of them at a very cheap price. What we're seeing, though, is we're seeing existing problems coming to the surface. So some of the unresolved tension in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the problems of lack of a peaceful and predictable relationship between Serbia and Kosovo, because the two parties have not worked hard enough to implement the requirements under both the Brussels dialogue, the Brussels agreements, and Ohrid agreement. So I do believe that if we start to solve some of those problems, it will start to close the space for Russia to use Serbia, Kosovo, and Bosnia and Herzegovina as a way of making mischief in the Western Balkans.
And let me start talking about normalization dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, which has been at the top of your priority list when it comes to the work in the Western Balkans. Results, I would say, have been mixed. If you were to go back 3 years ago and start that job today, what would you do differently in the approach towards Kosovo and Serbia normalization?
Well, look, it's hard to deal in hypotheticals, but I'll tell you one thing. I think we at every step we had real opportunities, and it took a lot of work to get the parties to recognize the potential that Europe was offering. So if you look at the Ohrid Agreement, it provides Kosovo 90% of what they need to integrate into Europe. That is, Serbia recognizes Kosovo's territorial integrity, their administrative control over all of the territory, recognizes their license plates, ID cards, passports, national symbols, their flag, their government-issued documents, diplomas, essentially almost everything that we've been struggling with individually, and opens the door for Kosovo's greater European integration, including recognition. Serbia would not block their recognition by other EU member states, and which would open the door to EU candidacy and Partnership for Peace and potentially, eventually, NATO. In response, Kosovo would guarantee that Serbia could have a role in the cultural, social, educational, and other social aspects of the life of Serbs who live in Kosovo, who, by the way, are dual citizens. And so, in other words, it sets up all of the parameters of what each country needs for their national security and for the continued protection of their cultural and linguistic heritage. So why don't we have results then? Sorry? So why we don't have more results to show? Well, we don't have more results. And look, I'll be very frank. Where we did have results was where we bridged the gap. And rather than facilitate agreements, we gave them an agreement to accept. So in other words, when Europe stepped in and along with the United States and gave them a specific document, in that case, I think we were successful. We did that with a basic agreement. And I would say that the annex was heavily influenced by the experts of the European Union Special Representative. It was a very successful agreement, historic, I would say. And we've done the same with the draft statute of the association, which gives Kosovo everything it needs. No executive authorities or executive level structures for the association, fully within the constitutional framework of Kosovo, and not interfering with the functionality. At the same time, it does give Serbs the ability to self-manage and to coordinate municipal services in their own language, and in some cases in coordination with Serbia. So there is everything to be gained by that agreement. Now, we should have insisted more on the full implementation of that rather than facilitating the two parties coming together, because in some cases, we noticed that there was a lack of goodwill in the parties.
On both parties?
Yes.
Was prioritizing the ASM the most effective strategy? And do you see any viable path forward for the issue of the association of the Serb municipalities?
Well, look, the association is absolutely crucial to Kosovo's interpretation and implementation. It is the most difficult one. And so with that difficult one, it was important that Kosovo signal its willingness to address the question of Serb minorities within its borders. That is really important. That has been a very difficult one. And from the American perspective, because the European path included important parts of this association at every step, we believe that by accepting a European proposal through a European process, which is the dialogue, and an agreement that's guaranteed by the European Union, it would give the American side an opportunity to lobby the European states to say that Kosovo has done everything that Europe has asked, and therefore new recognitions are warranted. Now, without that, we didn't have very much, shall we say, material to work with, which is why we think tactically doing the association would have been absolutely beneficial for Kosovo's international image at the time. Now, at the same time, it would give Serbia an opportunity to start creating the structures that it needed to provide some services and some support, including financial support, for Serbs who still depend on the Serbian state. That's why it was kind of important.
Escobar, how are the relationship between U.S. and Kosovo today?
Well, I would say that Kosovo has had a better relationship with the United States in the past. And it is a challenging one. As I said before, the United States is fully committed to Kosovo's independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security. That'll never change. At the same time, we have a very, very deep partnership with the people of Kosovo. That will never change. The United States remains very pro-Kosovo. And I do, whenever I travel there, I do feel the reciprocal feeling that they are very pro-American. So that gives us a tremendous strength and stability of the relationship. That said, it's no secret that we have had challenges in having a common vision for the region and a common understanding of how we could work together to advance Kosovo's national project. So I do hope that we will continue to work on improving that relationship. And I can also say that there's nothing but goodwill, not only in the United States, but within the entire Quint to improve that relationship.
And how are the relationships between the U.S. and Serbia? And here I want to follow up with another question before you answer. How do you address also critics who view the U.S. policy towards Serbia as ineffective, considering Serbia's strategic relationship with Russia and China, demonstrated by President Xi's visit in Belgrade recently? What alternative approaches would you propose to have between the U.S. and Serbia to achieve progress?
Well, look, I wouldn't say that it's been ineffective. I would say quite the opposite. I would say that, we've said before that we've had 140 years of relationship with Serbia, all of it good and positive, except for the Milosevic period. Now, we are in the process of rebuilding the trust and rebuilding that relationship. But for much of the 20th century, Serbia was very much a partner of the United States. And the United States remains very open to partnership with Serbia. But of course, there are conditions about the way Serbia interacts with its neighbors and the way Serbia interacts with its transatlantic partners. So I would say that if you look at some of the movement, that it includes participation in a lot of European processes, their support for Ukraine, and even to the extent of helping Ukrainian refugees, providing political support for Ukraine, which you saw this week with the visit of the Ukrainian foreign minister and Ukrainian first lady, that there are signs that Serbia is seriously considering its strategic position. And so in that regard, I can say that over the last few years that I've been engaged with Serbia, the 5 years, we have seen noticeable improvement in Serbia's orientation. And that's not to say that it's a lot, but it's important. Like every sign of progress is important for the region. So there will always be critics who believe that the only answer to our relationship to Serbia is to sanction, punish, and condemn Serbia. But that's not a policy. That is not going to help the region. So together with our European colleagues, we are holding the door of partnership with Serbia open. And it's up to the Serbian government to make the choices, both through the accession process and through its relationships with its neighbors and with Russia and China, to make the right decisions.
Escobar, do you believe that the U.S. should adjust its strategy towards Serbia after the composition of the Serbian government, the new government, with vocal supporters of the Russian invasion and of a Serbian world ideology?
Well, look, that government is new. I would say we are extremely disappointed that two sanctioned individuals are now in the Serbian government. That said, the composition of the Serbian government substantially hasn't changed over the last 6 years. You see a lot of the same faces, and you see a lot of the same people. Now, some of those people are very very active in building ties to the United States and Europe, and some of them less so. But that we will continue to communicate our expectations and our aspirations for that relationship through official channels. But in the meantime, I don't want to speak on behalf of my successor as to how the policy with Serbia should be dealt with.
Let's move on and turn to Bosnia and Herzegovina. The security issues in the country are high on the agenda, with EUFOR increasing its presence. Can the U.S. prevent a fracturing of the fragile peace, while Dodik, a close ally of Putin, has announced that he may declare Republika Srpska independence depending on the U.S. election win?
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, I mean, it's not my opinion and it's not a threat, but an independent Republika Srpska, it would be politically inviable. So in other words, all of the things that Republika Srpska benefits from right now, which is access to international credit, open borders with the European Union, and recognition from the most important all of its neighbors, all of that would go away. They would have to fight for recognition, which likely they wouldn't get. They wouldn't get visa liberalization. They wouldn't get access to credit. So I don't understand how anybody believes that the prospect of Republika Srpska independence is a viable one. Now that said, but we are very much committed to Bosnia's territorial integrity and its multi-ethnic culture. That means that we are very open to working with Serbs and with Republika Srpska, which we 100% recognize as a legitimate and important part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, that said, it's hard to work with people who deny that structure, who work to break down the peace, the Dayton Agreement, and the structure that has kept the peace for 25 years. So now our challenges are really with one party and one leader who are challenging that structure of 25 years. But we are fully committed to working with Serbs, fully committed to continuing to honor and recognize the commitment to Republika Srpska is a vital and important part of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
In your last Brussels Media Hub press briefing, you said that regardless of the election in North Macedonia, you were confident that the path to Europe will continue. Are you still confident after the victory of Vermano and concerns already raised about the press agreement?
Yes. Well, look, I'll tell you, we made, I think Europe and the United States made our position very clear with the president after the inauguration that we fully expect that that North Macedonia will continue on its European path, will continue to be a committed member of NATO. And believe me, they have been a committed member of NATO. And we've received assurances from all levels of the party leadership of the main party that won the elections, that they will remain committed to the European path. In fact, there is an increasing realism that there is no other alternative. So I think we will see, and I hope to see, that path continue to be the main policy objective of the new government. And as they do, they can expect American partnership.
Two more countries to discuss before we conclude this interview. Montenegro's new political landscape and its progress towards EU membership seems to have gained a new momentum. There are voices in the EU community that say that Montenegro can be the next EU member to join the European Union. On the other side, there are some concerns about the composition of the Montenegrin governing coalition with the pro-Russian parties gaining ground. Do you have any concerns on that?
Well, look,
what's your opinion?
First of all, one of the things that we've said, and one of the things I said at the beginning of this interview, is that what we're waiting for a new generation of pro-European, pro-Western leaders who govern according to civic principles and not ethnic rivalry. We have that in Montenegro. We have a 36-year-old president and a 36-year-old prime minister, both of them brilliant and both of them committed to the European path. Both of them with a strategic vision that almost nobody else in the region has. So yes, Montenegro will be the next European Union country. And it deserves our support. Those leaders deserve our support. Now, when you look at the challenges that Montenegro has had, one has been the lack of progress on democracy and the fight against corruption. And the other has been ethno-nationalism. And this coalition is sandwiched between those two options. But I do believe that the progress that the people of Montenegro are seeing will only serve to increase the number of people who are voting for the technocratic center that is bringing them to Europe. So I do see challenges with this pro-Russian party that is willing to challenge everything that this government stands for. But I do believe that Montenegro will find a way to continue on that path.
How do you see Albania's path towards European integration and the lack of political dialogue in the country?
Well, I think it's troubling. Now, I have to start by saying that Albania has been a great partner over the last 5 years that I've been involved in it back in the Balkans. And particularly in the last 3 years, Albania has shown a level of international leadership that is quite amazing when you think about where the country started in 1991. So they were a member of the UN Security Council as a rotating member, where they were tremendously helpful on the question of Ukraine and other international issues. They are a committed member of NATO, and they're a committed bilateral partner in the fight against terrorism, and the fight against organized crime. Now, that is an important context when you look at what's happening. There are still challenges in Albania, primarily the question of corruption, the manipulation of some institutions. So what we need is political parties that are also committed to holding each other accountable. We need an opposition that can hold the government accountable, that can provide people options, a range of options on dealing with the challenges that Albania has to face in its European path. And for that, we need the opposition to be very clear about what their position is, clear about its leadership. And I have to say, I hope that the choice for leadership is not somebody who reminds us of the bad old days in Albania of the 90s. So I am hopeful that it eventually, the opposition part, the main opposition party, will find its way.
I have to finish with this interview, which I'm told is the last one in your job still. But I have to ask another question before we conclude. What has been the biggest challenge that has kept you awake at night during your tenure?
Well, look, the biggest challenge has been the threat of violence in the Balkans is still there. And it is still there in many forms, both ethnic violence and inter-ethnic violence. And what we saw in Banska was very dangerous. That has been what has kept me awake at night. But that said, what we have in the Balkans, more than anything else, is enormous promise. And I do hope to stay abreast of all the things. I have many friends in the region. Every country of the Western Balkans, people have been nothing but open-hearted, hospitable, and friendly. And I will always be part of the Balkans.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Das Escobar. I want to express our sincere gratitude as the Atlantic Council of Europe Center, and my personal one, for your unwavering commitment and exceptional support to the Western Balkans throughout your tenure. And best of luck on your next assignment. As you said, you will miss the Balkans, but you can always visit.
Oh, that's right. And look, and thank you, Ilva, to you personally, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for always being a great partner. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye.